Alexandre Texier spent most of the last 2 seasons in Europe, but this season he returned. And how good was his return? Will he get a new contract with the Blue Jackets? What is his future with this team? We discuss on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. So thank you for hanging out. I appreciate it. Before we get started, I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Like I said at the top of the show, today we're talking all about Alexandre Texier. He came back. I thought had a perfectly reasonable series, but he needs a new contract. Will he get that with the Blue Jackets, or will they replace him with someone cheaper that does basically the same job? That's what we're going to talk about today. First off, we'll talk about kind of his season as a whole, because I thought he did pretty good, honestly. For a guy that last season was playing in the Swiss League for Zurich, I believe, and he spent a bunch of time out of the NHL. Oh, not a bunch of time. It was like a season and a half. He played 36 games for the Blue Jackets in the 21-22 season. I believe broke his finger and then ended up returning to France for a family thing and then just stayed there for the rest of that season. The next season played in Zurich, which is because he wanted to be closer to home. He was in the player assistance program for substance abuse and mental health, I believe. This season came back, made the team. And I liked his game a lot, honestly. He hit career highs in everything. 12 goals, 18 assists, 30 points overall, played 78 games, so was one of the healthier Blue Jackets on the season. And I thought really kind of came into his own in terms of what the Blue Jackets needed from Texier. The previous season that he was with the Blue Jackets, the 21-22 season, he had 11 goals in only 36 games, and it really looked like he'd kind of hit his stride and was figuring things out, and we're like, oh, okay, do they have an exciting future piece here? And then he got hurt, and then he didn't come back. Alexandre Texier is a second round draft pick, by the way. He was drafted 45th overall in 2017. This was his 5th year with the Blue Jackets this season, so 6th year, since being drafted, 7th year technically. But it was kind of an up and down season. His contract was extremely reasonable. I thought $1.5 million for a 30-point player, I think is perfectly fine when you have players making double that and getting fewer points. But he just okay. Here's my thing with Texier is, what does he do for this team that they couldn't get cheaper with someone else in the system? I see in Texier that, potential 20 to 25 goal scorer potential. Do they but can they afford to, first off, can they afford to keep him? Because at the minute he's kind of on the outside looking in. And I don't know that he's one of the 13 best forwards either. So first off, you've got to re-sign him, which I think they might be able to do for cheap, because I feel like you give him a 1-year show-me contract, kind of like what Alex Nylander is likely going to get. But then, okay, he's got to fight for a spot on the team. Where do you put him? Does he go onto the 3rd or 4th line and thrive there? Yes, probably. But I think that 20 to 25 goal potential is dependent on him playing higher in the lineup, and I don't think there's room for that. So then you're back to, well, what does he do? If you say that he gets the same amount, so just over 1.5 million he was playing for this year, do you give him that contract again? 1.5 times 2 was what he got, or 1.25 times 2. 1.525. Excuse me. I can read. I can speak. It's very late here, and I've recorded a lot of podcasts today. But what are they getting from Texier that they can't get from the immediate knee-jerk reaction I have is, can they get from James Malatesta what they get from Alexander Texier, excuse me. The double Alex is on this team right now. Can they get 30 points from James Malatesta next season? And James Malatesta is only making just under 850K for the next 2 seasons. You know, can they get from Treyfix Wolanski what they want from Texier? You know, Justin Danforth is a similar player. Are they going to get from Justin Danforth what they want from Alexandre Texier? Danforth's under contract for the next season at least. So like, that's really my biggest question with Texier is like, what does he add to this team that they can't get from someone who is already under contract for less money? Which is a shame because I like Texier a lot. I think he has Texier, if he goes somewhere else, is going to go somewhere else and have an extremely good career as one of those third line guys, you know, that makes maybe up to $3 million. And he's still young, by the way. He's only 24 years old. So like he's still down there in terms of age. Like he's probably around about at his peak right now, or he's about to get into his peak. He turns 25 in September, I believe. So like he's still, in the grand scheme of things, you know, a fairly young player. But I guess it all comes down to, do the Blue Jackets believe that they can get the most out of him by re-signing him? Because for me right now, he is so low on the priority list in terms of who needs a new contract. Like before we even think about Texier, I want to get Marchenko signed. I want to get Sillinger signed. I want to get Chinikov signed. I want to get Kent Johnson signed. Like Nylander is not probably less of a priority than Texier, but also I could see them just giving him, you know, a year at 1 million and being done with it. And then that's out of the way. They don't have to deal with that, you know. And then they also have to look at, well, do they like, if you can only keep one of Texier or Bean, which one do you keep? You know, there's a lot of lineup considerations happening here, and a lot of it is really out of Texier's control, which feels unfair. I will also say that Texier is one of the 4 of those key RFAs that is eligible for arbitration. So he could take this team to arbitration, and they can either, you know, pay him what he deserves, or they can make him a UFA. Like those are the options, you know, and he goes somewhere else. And I really have no idea of which way that's gonna go. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of Texier's game this season and what he really kind of impressed me with, what he improved on, and what I think could be some reasons that they might keep him around. So we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Game Time. The NBA playoffs are happening right now. The NHL playoffs are happening right now. It will be so cool. Obviously, I can't go to these games because I'm very far away, but you guys can go to these games, and you should get tickets for these games on Game Time. They're an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA specifically, which makes getting playoff tickets faster and easier, and prices on the app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets, and it doesn't even have to be the NBA. You can get, like I said, NHL. They've got other sports, MLB, college sports are done, the NFL is done, but they've got, like, NASCAR. They've got, like, track and field stuff. They've got cycling. They've got Indy 500. I don't know. I've run out of sports that I can name. They've got concerts, comedy, theater, everything that you can like buy a ticket for, you can get at Game Time. And like I said, lowest price guarantee for Game Time is amazing. If you find tickets in your section and low for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. They've got flash deals. They've got zone deals, which means that when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats, you can get even more money off. You can get views from your seats before you buy. And with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, Game Time is sure that you're going to be happy with your purchase. Or if you're not, they will fix it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. talking about Alexandre Texier today on Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked a little bit about like should they re-sign him, and I want to talk about a couple of reasons about why they maybe should re-sign him. My first is kind of like Alex Nylander, is he's gonna be cheap because he just took a year and a half out. He had a fine season, but not like a season where I'm like, wow, they're gonna have to pay this guy $1 million. Or well, more than $1 million because like that's how the NHL works. But like he didn't play himself out of a contract in Columbus, if that makes sense. He didn't blow me away, but that might work in his favor. So I think the most likely situation for Texier is getting another, I don't know if it's necessarily a bridge contract anymore, but just another short-term deal, maybe 2 years at $1.5 million to continue to grow, to continue to develop. And if he ends up exceeding that contract value, amazing. If he doesn't, whatever. It's 2 years at 1.5. The cap is going up next year. Like it's gonna get easier as the Blue Jackets go forward. We've just had, I think, 3 years of like no cap movement. So I think the cap is going to get easier and easier to handle, and it's going to get easier to swallow. Like if a contract like Texier's goes bad, it's going to be easier to swallow that. 1.5 million for Texier is not going to break the bank. If they start getting closer to like the 2.5, like the Corrali contract, for example, which is it was 2.5 million for 4 seasons, I believe, then we might have to start having a conversation about how that's not a great contract. But if they basically give Texier his previous contract with maybe a little bit of a raise, like I'm perfectly fine with that. And here's the thing. Texier was one of the better defensive forwards for the Blue Jackets this season, which is saying something considering how poor the Blue Jackets were defensively this season. He had a positive goals above expected, which is, again, for this team, shocking. He had 1.1. He scored 1.1 goals above expected, which, you know what? I will take that. Shooting at 11%, that's fine. He just, I don't know. He really felt like he not figured it out, but it felt like he took strides this season that make me think that he's going to take bigger strides next season. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be. And when we did the Texier preview last season, obviously we did it prior to him returning to the NHL. So we just spent a year and a half out. We just seen his like scoring a goal every 3 games or whatever it was, 11 goals in 36 or 39 games. So like we had a lot of high expectations for him. And so we talked about, is he a top 6 player for this team? I no longer think that, but I do think that there is value to him being on this team that you maybe don't get with a guy like, for example, I mentioned Justin Danforth. There's a guy that does what Texier does, but for cheaper and for someone who's already under contract. Justin Danforth is 31 years old and played like basically none of the season. Like he wasn't really an impact player. Is he even going to be on the team next season? Will he make the team? Like that's the kind of thing I think about with Justin Danforth. He played 71 games apparently, Justin Danforth. My apologies to him. I think I misremembered. Which, I mean, that's not a great sign for him if I'm like, man, he was gone all season and actually he played 71 games, but he wasn't the impact forward that Texier was. So like, can he do what Texier does, but better for cheaper? Not necessarily. So like now you're looking at it and you're like, well, would you rather have Alexandre Texier at 1.5 million or Justin Danforth at 1.1 million? Bearing in mind, Texier is 24, just about to turn 25. Justin Danforth turns 32 in, he just turned 31 in March, so he won't be 32 until near the end of next season. But like, he's an undrafted player that made his NHL debut at the age of like 29. This is about what we're going to get out of Justin Danforth. Whereas I still think there's some potential there for Texier to take more steps forward. And like I said, he could be a 20-goal scorer in this league. He was really on his way to it a couple of seasons ago before, obviously, the injury and then the family matter and then the NHLPA program kind of derailed that a little bit. But he's still a player that could be an impact player in this league, I like Texier a lot as a player. I think, again, he was kind of maybe not mishandled necessarily, but he was another guy I feel like that struggled at times in terms of getting ice time. He averaged 15 minutes apparently this season, which honestly is about what I expected, but that kind of some games he played 23 minutes, some games he played like 9 minutes. So there's really it vacillated wildly. I believe his lowest ice time was 8 minutes 19, and his highest ice time was 23 minutes that he played near the end of the season. So like just wildly inconsistent, which again is not necessarily his fault, but lots of moving parts that again I think are making it tough to evaluate how effective a player could be. Because if you look at it, like, oh, okay, he averaged 15 minutes. That's about what I expect. I'm like, yeah, but half the games were him playing 23 minutes and half the games were him playing 8 minutes. So like, yeah, that's how averages work. But I would love to see, again, consistency from Texier. He was another guy that I feel like didn't really get a consistent line to play on. I really liked when he was playing with, it would have been Corrali and Danforth on that fourth line. Like, I liked that line a lot. I thought that was an extremely good fourth line, but do you want more from Texier than a fourth line? You know, I'm just looking up what his most used line was. It would have been with Sillinger and Marchenko. It was actually the third most used line for the Blue Jackets this season, which is a wild. Texier, Sillinger, Marchenko was 204 minutes, and then Texier, Corrali, Danforth at 42 minutes, which that line was actually, if you look at expected goals for lines that played over, let's say, 80 minutes, because this season was weird and didn't make a lot of sense. It was actually the best line on the team in terms of expected goals for. So that was a really great line. It probably played a little bit too much and probably was a little bit ineffective at times, but I guess that answer, like, that's the question, is do you want a really great fourth liner in Texier, or do you want him to kind of aspire to be a good third liner, maybe an acceptable second line? I don't think he's a second line player, which brings us right back to how much money do you spend on a third line or fourth line player? You know, I'm thinking specifically in this case of, and I don't think that this is a comparable necessarily, but I am thinking in terms of like signing the depth players to long-term deals. The Pierre Engvall contract for the New York Islanders, where he signed, I believe, a 7 or 8 year contract at $3 million. He's 27 years old, and that contract is aging like milk. So I don't think, like, that's not what's going to happen here, but I don't necessarily think that Texier is a long-term piece for this team, or if he is, he's going to be one of those guys that goes from 2-year contract to 2-year contract to 2-year contract, you know? Maybe he'll surprise us. Maybe he'll take even more steps forward next season. But I think, based on why the Blue Jackets drafted him, based on what they've seen from him now, up to this point, like, I could see them re-signing Texier and him being one of those, like, depth pieces that can play up in the lineup if you need them to, but probably shouldn't be relied upon to be a top-line player, you know? Let's take another quick break, and then when we get back, I want to talk about a couple of reasons of why they maybe shouldn't keep Texier around. And I've talked about a couple of them a little bit, but I'll get into a little bit more detail about why I think that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I want to tell you all about Indeed, because there's no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, which is the hiring platform you need to build your team. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. It's the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's powerful hiring platform can help you do it all. They've got tools that streamline hiring that might you match candidates. With Indeed Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job descriptions the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed's US data. I have been lucky enough to not have to job hunt for a little while, but when I was job hunting, Indeed was the place I went, basically exclusively. So I can only imagine that it's just as good to hire on as it is to job hunt on. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer is only good for a limited time, so claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Once again, that's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We are wrapping up our conversation about Alexandre Texier and whether he could be or should be a Blue Jacket in October. And here's the... Honestly, like, Texier feels like a cap casualty to me, which is a weird thing to say, but I'm looking at the cap space. I'm looking at how they're gonna, like, who they have to fit under that cap. So, we talked about it on last Friday, I believe, was the episode. $23.475 million. They have to get 8.7 of that to Patrick Laine, first off, when he leaves the player assistance program. So that immediately, almost $9 million of that is gone. So that gives us just over $14 million to give to Chinikov, Marchenko, Nylander, Sillinger, Johnson. And then I think they might want to try and keep Jake Bean as well. That's a lot of players to try and put under that $14 million cap space, And I just think that I think they'd love to keep Texier. I just don't know if they can afford to, especially because, like I kind of talked about at the beginning of the episode, can they get someone to do his job for less money? And I'm looking at James Malatesta specifically for this. He's a winger. He's making less than $850K. He plays a similar kind of style to Texier. And I think if you're looking for like a 20-goal scorer out of Texier, then Malatesta is probably not the place to go. But if you want like 10 to 12 goals out of 78 games, Malatesta feels like the guy to me. You're also maybe hoping that Trey Fix-Wolansky finally gets that long NHL look that he maybe deserves after dominating in the AHL year after year. I think the organization is kind of getting ready to move on from Trey Fix-Wolansky, which is kind of a bummer because I like him a lot. But like, he's another guy that I think they could be looking at, as he's making $775,000 this year, and then is an RFA. He's the same age as Texier, I believe, is from the same draft, but was a 7th round draft pick instead of a 2nd round draft pick, So like, he's another guy that I could look at and see them going, right, we can get out of Trey Fix-Wolansky. If they get 10 goals out of Trey Fix-Wolansky next season, then they don't need Texier necessarily, or if they can get 10 goals out of Trey Fix-Wolansky and then another 10 out of James Malatesta, and they're paying about that much money for both of them combined as they are for Texier, like, that losing Texier is much easier to swallow. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is I would like to keep Texier. I would not be upset if they keep Texier. I look at the cap situation. I look at the numbers and I'm like, well, someone else is not going to get a contract if Texier does get a contract, And we talked a little bit on, I want to say, Tuesday's episode about, like, does Provorov move and give them an extra $4 million of cap space? Do they manage to get out from under Elvis's contract? And that's another like $5.5 million of cap space. Do they move on from, someone like Sean Corrali? That's $2.5 million. Do they move on from Boone Jenner? That's $3.75. Like, if Patrick Laine doesn't return to the team, there's an extra $9 million they've got to play with. So like, lots of things up in the air right now, but I'm looking and I'm like, Texier is right at the bottom of the list for the guys that need new contracts in terms of priority for me. I think I would even put Jake Bean at a higher priority than Texier, just because I think Jake Bean probably brings a little bit more to this team than Texier. I think he had a really great season this year when he was in the lineup and when they would let him play, unless they were benching him for making mistakes, which is a whole other thing that I'm not going to get into right now. But I like Jake Bean a lot this season. I think he was good. I think he deserves a new contract. And I think replacing Texier, I think, is going to be easier than replacing Bean. Especially if they end up moving on from Provorov, for example, or if they move on from Boquist. Like, they don't have as much money trapped in the defense as they do trapped in the... Not trapped, but Jake Bean's really the only defenseman that needs a new contract right now. Or, like, Marcus Bjork needs a contract, Jake Christiansen, Nick Blankenburg, Billy Sweetie, Jacob Zboril all need new contracts, but all of those guys, for me, feel like AHL guys. So, like, sign them and go with God, Bean is going to be the interesting one for me. And I think if they can only pick between Texier and Bean, I think they probably pick Bean, which is kind of a bummer for Texier. He's going to go to like Vegas or Dallas or somewhere and like thrive. And then we're going to have to spend the next 10 years listening to how they can't believe Columbus let Texier get away when he scores 40 goals in his first season with Dallas, like William Karlsson did with Vegas. That's honestly, that's the most likely situation here is Texier goes somewhere else and thrives, and then we have to live with all of that nonsense all over again. But in terms of just kind of wrap this up, Texier's grade for this season, I'm gonna give him a B-, I think. Edging on C+. I wanted a little bit more from him, but I understand that he didn't play in the top 6 very often. And when he did play in the top 6, I don't know that he was necessarily playing to his strengths. But I would take him back. I would take him back on the team next season easily if they can fit him in under the cap. So maybe I go C+ as opposed to B-. I think I'm gonna stick with C+. I think that feels, yeah. You know what? I'm sticking with it. That's my decision. Final answer. But that's kind of all I've got for today. Tomorrow we will be doing another prospect profile. This time we're going to be going with Hadi Kalakesh of the other half of Locked On NHL Prospects. We're doing a Locked On NHL Prospect heavy week this week, and we're going to be talking about Beckett Seneca, who is a guy that is getting a lot of noise about potentially being in that kind of 4 to 6 range for NHL teams, and so I want to look into him. And is he a guy that they could maybe take a flyer on at 4th overall? I don't necessarily think so, but it's a fun thought experiment to talk about. So we'll talk about that tomorrow with Hadi. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms. We're over on YouTube. We're on Sirius XM. And you can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. Find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, for making it your first listen of the day. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.